June 29th is almost here. And if there is someone you have lost, someone whose absence still settles over you in the quiet moments, there is something you need to know before that day arrives. St. Peter the Apostle is going to do 8 specific things for the soul of your departed loved one. 8 things that St. Teresa of Jesus put into writing. Things that most Catholics have never been told they can ask him for. Things that the keeper of the kingdom has the authority to do because Christ himself placed the keys in his hands. And there is one particular act, the last of the 8, that changes your loved one's eternity in a way that no priest has ever explained from the pulpit. If you let this date pass without asking for it, your loved one will have to wait another full year. Have you ever wondered why there are days on the Catholic calendar that open doors the rest of the year keeps shut? There's a very specific reason why the Church placed this solemnity on June 29th, and it has everything to do with what happens in heaven when an apostle marks his own entrance into glory. Before we go any further, write the first name of your departed loved one in the comments right now. Just the first name. That small act is already placing your loved one directly under Peter's gaze. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the notification bell, because what follows was prepared for those who have not given up on the idea that something can still be done for the ones they have lost. Every word in what comes next builds on the word before it, and the order matters more than you might think. There is a moment in the gospel that is rarely preached with the weight it deserves, and yet it is the most consequential moment in Christ's public life for the soul of your departed loved one. It happened at Caesarea Philippi, far from Jerusalem, in the shadow of a cliff face where the pagans believed one of the mouths of the underworld gaped open. It was there that Jesus looked Simon Peter in the eyes and handed him something he had given to no other man. He handed him 2 keys. He told him, in words the Church has repeated for 20 centuries, that on him he would build his church, and that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. He told him that whatever he bound on earth would be bound in heaven, and he told him, above everything else, that the keys of the kingdom of heaven were now in his keeping. Think for a moment about what that means for the soul of your departed loved one right now. Every locked door has a key. Every locked door of the kingdom has a key, and that key is in Peter's hands. There are doors that have been closed to your loved one for years. Doors that may have shut at the moment of death because something was left unresolved. Others that closed because a confession was never made. Others that closed simply for want of prayers offered in their name. Doors that seem so solid that your heart has already quietly given up on the idea of ever seeing your loved one in glory. June 29th is the day the doorkeeper of the kingdom celebrates his own definitive entrance into glory. On that day, according to a spiritual tradition that St. Teresa of Jesus knew and lived from within her convent, the apostles' keys turn with an authority that spends the rest of the year in a kind of rest. The whole church, both the church militant and the church triumphant, turns toward him with a single imploring voice. And he, who for a full year has watched millions of souls waiting, lifts his hands on that day and begins to open. St. Teresa of Avila wrote, in The Way of Perfection, in the chapters where she speaks of obedience to the Church and to the Supreme Pontiff as Peter's successor, that the union of souls with the doorkeeper of the kingdom is one of the most practical mysteries the Catholic faith holds. She wrote it plainly, without theological ornamentation, because she herself had experienced in prayer how apostolic intercession unlocked specific graces. She wrote that when a sister of the convent died carrying some unfinished spiritual debt, the nuns turned immediately to the holy apostles, and most especially to the first among them. They knew something many Catholics today have forgotten, that the keys are real and that they are held by someone who is still alive. In her personal letters, the ones she wrote to her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda and to her niece, there are brief but firm references to this practice. Entrusting a departed loved one to the apostle, whose feast day was approaching, was, for her, is integrated into daily life as the recitation of the office or the silence before mental prayer. Here is what you need to understand before June 29th arrives. Peter was, before he was the first pope, the first man who denied Christ 3 times, and then wept so bitterly that his face bore the marks of those tears for the rest of his life. That experience, standing at the edge of condemnation and being welcomed back by pure mercy, made him the intercessor who understands your loved one most deeply. If the person you lost died with something unreconciled, with a sacrament left undone, or with a spiritual wound they carried to the grave, there is something you need to hear. Peter has been there. Peter knows what it is to betray the master you love most. Peter knows what it is to wake before dawn, asking forgiveness with a raw throat. Peter heard the rooster crow twice, and on the second crow he understood, in a way no one else has ever understood, exactly the kind of place where your loved one may be right now, suspended between a debt and a mercy. And Peter, by direct mandate from Christ, holds the key that opens precisely the door your loved one needs. When that key turns, what happens in heaven is something Saint Teresa of Jesus described as a movement of the very air of glory. Souls that had been waiting a long time felt all at once that something had opened. For her, it was a specific spiritual experience, lived in ecstasy, and set down in writing with her characteristic prudence, not naming who she saw, not claiming definitive visions, but leaving on record for her nuns and for all who came after that these liturgical dates hold something beyond commemorative instruction. They are moments when heaven reorders itself to answer the prayers rising from below. Here is the detail that changes everything. Peter opens the door with one condition, a single condition written in the gospel and known to very few Catholics. The condition has to do with something that you, from here on earth, must do before the 29th. Something specific, something simple, accessible to any devoted person. Something that most people who ask for the intercession of the saints forget to do. If you do it, the key turns. If you do not, the key stays still, even though Peter has every desire to help your loved one. That specific condition, what you must do before June 29th for the first of the 8 doors to open, is directly tied to the next step Peter takes as intercessor. Because the doorkeeper of the kingdom, once the door is open, does not leave the soul of your loved one alone on the threshold. There is a further gesture, deeply apostolic, that he makes immediately afterward. A gesture that has to do with nets, with shorelines, and with a master who was waiting on the beach at dawn. The Gospel of John describes the last encounter between the risen Christ and Peter with an almost sculptural precision. It was before sunrise. Mist still lay across the Sea of Tiberias. Peter and 6 other disciples had spent the night in the boat and caught nothing. A stranger standing on the shore called out to them to cast the net on the right side. They did. The net came up so full they could not drag it in. And then John, the youngest, was the first to recognize the stranger and said quietly, "It is the Lord." Peter reacted the way only Peter could. He wrapped his outer garment around himself, jumped into the water fully dressed, and swam to shore without waiting for the others. He was in a hurry to reach the master he had denied 3 times. When the other disciples finally managed to drag the net to land, they counted the fish one by one. There were 153. And the gospel notes something no theologian in 20 centuries has overlooked. Despite the weight, the net did not tear. The number 153 has been a subject of meditation for the fathers of the church across the centuries. Saint Jerome wrote that it corresponded to the total number of fish species known in his day, a sign that no kind of soul is left outside the net. Saint Augustine read it as a mystical figure, the sum of the numbers from 1 to 17, where 10 are the commandments and 7 are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The conclusion is the same. The net reaches everyone. That unbroken net is Peter. And that unbroken net is what Peter is going to do for the soul of your departed loved one on June 29th. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote in the Interior Castle, in the final chapters where she describes the spiritual marriage of the soul with Christ, that there is a decisive moment at the soul's entrance into glory, the moment of presentation. The soul does not come before the spouse alone. It arrives in the company of someone who knows it, someone who has prayed for it, someone with the authority to bring it forward. For ordinary faithful, that someone is usually the guardian angel. For souls still being purified, it is often a saint to whom they were devoted in life, or whose feast day is drawing near. And for all souls, on the solemnity of June 29th, there is an apostle with authority over the whole net. Here is the answer to a question you may have been carrying since this video began. Why June 29th specifically, and not any other day of the year? The reason is theologically concrete. June 29th is the day of Peter's martyrdom in Rome under Nero in the circus on the Vatican Hill. It is the day he entered glory for good. The Church has taught from the earliest centuries that the dies natalis of a saint, the day of birth into heaven, is the date on which heaven inclines its attention toward that intercessor with a particular preference. That date has a precise historical foundation. The Roman tradition, recorded by Eusebius of Caesarea in his ecclesiastical history, holds that Peter and Paul were both martyred in Rome under the same emperor. Nero signed both sentences. Peter asked to die head downward, not considering himself worthy to die as his master had died. Paul, as a Roman citizen, was executed by sword on the Ostian Way. That is why the solemnity of June 29th joins both names together. The Church celebrates them as one. It is as though the Heavenly Father says to the apostle on that day, "Ask what you will." And Peter, in response, presents the whole net, the net of souls who throughout the year place themselves under his patronage. Picture for a moment what that means for the soul of your departed loved one. Picture the net heavy with souls, drawn by the apostles' hands, arriving at the shore where Christ already has the coals burning and the bread prepared. Picture among all those souls one bearing the first name you wrote in the comments a few minutes ago. Picture Peter lifting it carefully, not letting the net tear, and presenting it personally to the Master. And Christ receiving it without demanding additional account, because the apostle himself has already given the assurance needed. What you are picturing has theological precision. It is what the Church has taught for 2,000 years about the communion of saints applied to prayer for the departed. Saint Teresa of Avila explained it very plainly to her nuns. She said that when a sister died, the others literally imagined the soul of the deceased being held up by the saints to whom she had been devoted. She said it with the seriousness of someone who had prayed for the departed and seen results. Souls arrive at glory accompanied, presented, upheld. The soul that arrives alone, on its own merits exclusively, is exceedingly rare. The vast majority arrive on the arm of an intercessor who has sustained them through the purification. But there is a problem you need to know about before we go any further. There are souls that arrive at the shore in the intact net, yet cannot step off the boat under their own power. Souls dragging a weight the net holds but cannot resolve. Souls that, though presented by Peter and recognized by Christ, remain bound to something that keeps them one step behind the spouse who is calling them. That something has an old name in the spiritual tradition, a name Saint Teresa of Jesus knew well, because she herself experienced it in prayer for her own departed loved ones. And for that something, Peter has another gesture, another apostolic act that goes beyond the net. It is an act that has to do with a night in a Jerusalem prison, with an angel who passed through the walls, and with chains that fell to the floor without waking the jailer. Peter was asleep. It was the night before his execution. King Herod Agrippa, grandson of the same Herod who had ordered the massacre of the holy innocents in Bethlehem, had decided to continue his family's lineage of blood by adding the first apostle to the list. Peter was in a dungeon in Jerusalem with 2 soldiers on either side of him, chained at the wrists to armed men, with more guards at the outer doors. The precaution had a reason. After the miraculous escape of the other apostles months earlier, the king had multiplied the guard. 4 squads of 4 soldiers each rotated through the night watch, and over all of it, 2 heavy iron chains bound Peter's hands, one to each wrist, fastened to the wall and to the soldiers beside him. But Peter was sleeping. That is the first thing the book of Acts wants us to know. A man who knows he will die tomorrow does not sleep. Peter slept. Because the first apostle had learned in his years with Christ that exterior chains break easily when God decides to act. And that night, God decided to act. An angel of the Lord entered the cell, the space filled with light. The angel struck Peter on the side and said, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell from the apostle's wrists without a single soldier hearing the sound. The iron doors opened on their own. The streets of Jerusalem were empty. When Peter was safely away, the angel disappeared, and only then did the apostle realize it had all been real. This episode is in the 12th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. The Church has read it for 20 centuries as one of the most hope-filled pages in the New Testament. And from the 4th century onward, the fathers of the Church taught something that very few Catholics today are aware of: that the chains of Peter remain effective as a sign, that the angel who broke them continues to operate under divine mandate, and that the soul of your departed loved one, if it is bound to something right now, can be freed by the same angelic gesture that freed the apostle that night. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote in the book of her life, in the chapters describing her experiences with souls in purgatory, that the chained soul is the most accurate image of the purgative state. She wrote it after seeing in prayer someone very close to her, identified by her biographers as a deceased Jesuit confessor, in a state of profound constraint. The soul couldn't move forward. There were chains. And Saint Teresa of Avila understood in that moment that prayer for the departed was a concrete operation of liberation. To pray is to break links. Here is a question that few Catholics dare to ask themselves. What kind of chains are holding the soul of your departed loved one? The Catholic spiritual tradition, expressed in the Catechism, distinguishes 2 kinds. There is the chain of temporal punishment due to sin, the debt of justice that remains after the guilt has been forgiven. And there is the chain of disordered attachment, love wrongly placed in possessions, in people, in habits the soul never released in life. The first is paid off through purification. The second can only be broken by external intercession, because the soul on its own can no longer let it go. Peter has authority over both. Over the first, because the treasury of the Church, of which he is the administrator by Christ's mandate, applies the infinite merits of the Redeemer to the soul, shortening its punishment. Over the second, because the angel who entered his cell in Jerusalem continues to be sent by God to release what a soul can no longer release on its own. And Peter, on June 29th, adds to the presentation of the Net One further act. He explicitly asks that the Lord's angels enter the spiritual cells of the souls entrusted to him on that day, and that the chains fall. Look at that cell for a moment. Wrists bound, an angel entering with light, chains dropping to the floor without the jailer waking, and in the middle of that scene, the soul of your departed loved one rising after years with its freedom restored. That image is in the gospel, it is in the doctrine, it is in the documented visions of Saint Teresa of Jesus. Its theological foundation is solid. There is one more detail in the Acts episode that almost no one highlights, and yet it changes the entire reading. The book says that while Peter was in prison, The whole church was praying for him without ceasing. The entire Christian community of Jerusalem, gathered in the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, was spending the nights in prayer for the apostles' release. The angel entered when human intercession had reached a certain density. The liberation of the apostle was, in the natural order of things, the fruit of the community's intense prayer. And here is what you need to understand before the 29th. Peter's intercession for your departed loved one works the same way, Peter asks. The angel acts. But for that to happen, you, from here below, must do what the early church did that night. Intense, specific prayer, directed explicitly toward the liberation of the soul that is bound. Without that prayer, the chains may stay where they are, even if the apostle has his hands raised in heaven. And there is a liturgical act available to any Catholic that multiplies that prayer in a way few people know about. An act that Saint Teresa of Avila herself recommended to her nuns with urgency on feast days of the apostles. An act that goes beyond the Mass, though it includes it. An act that has to do with ancient words, with repetition, and with an instrument the soul of your loved one recognizes from the very first turn. Christ said something to Peter at the Last Supper that is almost never preached with the force it deserves. They were at table. Gethsemane was only hours away. Jesus knew exactly what Peter was going to do that very night. Deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. And yet, before it happened, before he even mentioned the betrayal openly, he said words that are written in the 22nd chapter of Luke's Gospel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you all, to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your own faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. That last phrase is what you need to carry with you until June 29th. Strengthen your brothers. Christ gave Peter, even before the keys, a specific mission, to confirm in faith those who are wavering. And the Church has understood for 20 centuries that that mission extends far beyond the ecclesiastical office of living bishops. It is a permanent authority of the apostle, still being exercised from heaven in favor of those who wavered in life and are still wavering on the other shore. Think about your loved one for a moment. Looking back honestly, did they die firm in the Catholic faith? Did they die believing without shadow of doubt in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, in sacramental confession, in eternal life, in the one holy, Catholic and Apostolic Church? Most people, even those who prayed their whole lives, arrive at their final moments with cracks in their faith. Small cracks that routine had papered over. Doubts they kept quiet, too embarrassed to bring to a confessor. Modern ideas that had seeped in and that a priest never managed to correct before the last breath. Those cracks do not condemn the soul, but they hold it back. They delay the definitive encounter with Christ because the soul needs to arrive to him with faith made whole, not the cracked faith it carried to the grave. This is where Peter enters in a decisive way. Christ charged him with confirming wavering brothers in the faith. On June 29th, when heaven bends its attention toward the apostle, Peter exercises that authority with particular intensity over every soul entrusted to him. He gathers the cracks one by one. He repairs them. He completes what the soul did not finish believing in life. He gives the soul on the other shore what it failed to complete here. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote about this in her own words in The Way of Perfection. In the chapters where she speaks of the Our Father and the virtues a soul needs in order to persevere, she wrote that the first virtue required for entering deep prayer and remaining in it is firm faith. Without firm faith, she said, there is no stable dwelling. The soul may enter prayer, may receive consolations, may even experience mystical graces. But if faith wavers, the dwelling collapses at the first wind. That firm faith, she said, was the greatest gift a soul could ask of the apostles, and most especially of the first among them, because he was the one who heard from Christ's own mouth the explicit command to confirm. Saint Teresa of Avila developed this idea in the way of perfection with direct, unambiguous words. She set it down in writing, the relevant passage is preserved in the original manuscript, that Peter's authority was not limited to his earthly life, that it remains active, that it continues confirming in the faith those who waver, living and departed alike, and that invoking it by name, calling on the first apostle explicitly, is the surest way to obtain it. These observations appear in the chapters where she explains prayer for the whole church and the union of the church militant with the church triumphant. And here is where a question I opened at the beginning of this video finds its answer. What was the condition you from here below had to fulfill before the 29th for the first door to open? The condition is precisely this: profess the Apostles' Creed aloud for the soul of your departed loved one, saying their first name before the opening line. The Apostles' Creed is the complete summary of the faith that the wavering soul needs to receive. It is the most ancient profession of the Church, attributed by tradition to the 12 apostles, gathered before they scattered across the world. Early patristic tradition, preserved in 4th century writers, holds that each apostle contributed one article of the Creed before departing to preach the gospel. Peter contributed the first. I believe in God, the Father Almighty. That is why this creed carries his seal more than any others. And when you profess it explicitly for your departed loved one before the 29th, you are handing Peter the specific material on which he applies the confirmation. Without that act, Peter has the authority but lacks the soul that has been entrusted to him. With it, the confirmation is immediate. Do it this way. Find a quiet moment at home before June 29th. Light a candle if you like, though it is not required. Say your loved one's first name aloud. Wait 3 seconds. Then profess the entire Apostles' Creed slowly, without skipping a single phrase. When you finish, add simply, Saint Peter the Apostle confirmed this brother of mine in the complete faith of the Church. That is enough. That is the act of entrustment. But there is something else Peter does for your loved one immediately after confirming the faith. Something that has to do with tears, with the most bitter weeping an apostle has ever shed in the whole history of salvation. With a gift the soul of your departed loved one can receive if you know how to ask for it in the right way, at the right moment. With the very words that Saint Teresa of Jesus left in writing in her autobiography, so that no devoted Catholic would ever forget them. There is one tear in the gospel that changed the history of salvation. Just one. It falls at dawn in a courtyard in Jerusalem, on the stone floor beside a charcoal fire where Peter had been warming himself while he denied the Master. The rooster had crowed twice. Christ, bound and beaten, turned for an instant in the middle of the escort and looked Peter in the eyes. And Peter went outside and wept bitterly. That is how Luke's Gospel says it in chapter 22, verse 62. He went outside and wept bitterly. That tear of Peter's carries a spiritual property that Catholic theology has studied for 17 centuries. It was, according to the fathers of the Church, the first tear of perfect repentance in the New Testament. Other tears had come before it in the Gospels, Mary Magdalene washing Christ's feet with hers, which responded to a different grace entirely. But this tear had the specific quality of an apostle who understands in a single instant that he has wounded the beloved he knew best. And because of that tear, the fathers teach, Christ gave him back his trust 3 days later on the shores of Tiberias and entrusted him with the keys of the kingdom. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote at length about the gift of tears in the book of her life. In the chapters where she describes how God granted her for months at a time an extraordinary capacity to weep over her own sins and the sins of others, she recorded something very precise. Spiritual tears have distinct categories. There are tears of natural sorrow, products of temperament. There are tears of surface devotion, which the soul produces out of sensory consolation, and which do not last. And there is a third kind, rare and precious, which he described as linked in a spiritual way to Peter's weeping after the denial. Tears the soul receives as a direct gift of the Holy Spirit. Tears that cleanse the debt of sin in a way no other act can match for speed and depth. Here is what you need to understand before the 29th. The gift of tears does not end with the death of the body. Souls in purgatory can receive it, and when they do, their purification accelerates in a way that no other grace produces with the same speed, because tears applied by apostolic intercession to the soul of the departed complete in hours what might otherwise take decades of passive purification. Peter holds this gift in fullness. He received it personally from Christ at that dawn in the high priest's courtyard. And according to the spiritual teaching gathered by Saint Teresa of Avila, he continues applying it to those who invoke him by name. On June 29th, in his own solemnity, the fountain opens. The tears he wept in Jerusalem descend, through the communion of saints, to the soul of every departed loved one entrusted to him. And the soul, without a body to weep with materially, weeps spiritually, deep within its being, with the tears the apostle lends it, so that its purification may end. Think for a moment about the soul of your departed loved one receiving that gift, weeping inwardly for the first time since death with tears that cleanse, tears that release old attachments that ordinary prayer had not managed to loosen, tears that complete the reconciliation of whatever was left unreconciled in life. That image is exactly what Saint Teresa of Jesus described in her visions of souls in purgatory. The soul weeps spiritual tears, and in weeping, draws closer to glory. There is something you need to know before we continue. The gift of tears is not applied to the soul of your departed loved one automatically simply because June 29th arrives. It requires that you, from here below, perform a specific act in the preceding days. A small act, simple, but theologically precise. The act is this. During the 9 days before June 29th, traditionally from June 20th, pray one single decade of the Rosary each night, asking St. Peter the Apostle explicitly to apply his tears to the soul of your departed loved one. 1 decade, 9 days. No complicated novenas, no elaborate prayers you would set aside out of exhaustion. Just 1 decade prayed well, with your loved one's name at the beginning and at the end offered for the application of apostolic tears. If you do not have a rosary, counting 10 Hail Marys on your fingers is sufficient. If you cannot remember every word of the Hail Mary precisely, what you do remember, said with sincerity, is enough. The effectiveness of this prayer depends above all on the constancy of intention across the 9 days. 1 missed decade does not destroy the novena. Continue the following night without self-reproach, with your loved one's first name on your lips. The apostle keeps count with the generosity of a father who knows exactly how hard it is to persevere. This is precisely the form of brief novena that Saint Teresa of Avila taught her nuns for feast days of the apostles and for the departed loved ones she commended to them. 1 decade a day for 9 days was, in her own words, the minimum spiritual dose that opened the passage to apostolic graces. More decades were welcome. Fewer, she said, did not accumulate sufficient density of prayer. The number 9 corresponded to the 9 days the Virgin and the apostles prayed together in the upper room before Pentecost. That is why that number unlocks the graces of the Holy Spirit applied through the apostles. After the tears comes another act of the apostle, an act that has to do with a shepherd seeking a lost sheep. With a voice the sheep recognize, with a command repeated 3 times on the lakeshore, the same number of times Peter had denied the Master. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. and among those sheep Peter has been commanded to tend is the soul of your departed loved one, if you know how to present it to the first shepherd. The sheep know their shepherd's voice, one specific voice that has been calling them by name every morning since they were born, a voice no stranger can imitate, however much bread he offers. Christ said this in the Gospel of John chapter 10, "I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. My sheep hear my voice. I call them by name, and they follow me." But the good shepherd delegated part of his shepherding before he ascended to the Father to a single man. The scene is in John chapter 21, after the miraculous catch and the breakfast on the shore. Christ drew Peter aside along the water's edge and asked him 3 questions, the same question 3 times. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And to each of Peter's affirmative answers, Christ gave him a mandate. "Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep." The fathers of the church have taught for 17 centuries that the 3 questions and the 3 mandates form the precise and symmetrical healing of the 3 denials in the courtyard. Peter had denied 3 times. To each renewed profession of love, Christ responded with a pastoral mandate. Peter was constituted universal shepherd by direct mandate from the only good shepherd who exists. Here is the detail that changes everything. That pastoral authority is exercised over the living and over those who have already crossed the threshold of death. The souls in purgatory are sheep. Souls that went astray in life are lost lambs the shepherd continues to search for, to bring them into the presence of the original Good Shepherd. Saint Teresa of Jesus left it in writing in the interior castle, in the chapters describing the 7th dwellings and the soul's definitive union with Christ, that the soul which went astray in life has a specific destiny after death. If it died in a state of grace, it is saved. But it also finds itself in a longer purification, because the sheep that wandered from the flock has to learn in purgatory to recognize once again the voice of the Good Shepherd. That relearning can take a long time, and while it goes on, the soul hears the voice from a distance, but has not yet quite managed to follow it. Peter has a direct mandate from Christ to tend those sheep. On June 29th, in his solemnity, he goes out to the hillside. He goes out in the spiritual reading of the tradition to seek the lost sheep that throughout the year were entrusted to his patronage. He calls them by name. And the sheep that in life had gone astray, hearing the apostolic voice naming them one by one, stir, draw closer, leave the place where they had been, and follow the shepherd of shepherds toward the presence of Christ. Think for a moment about your loved one. Looking back honestly, was there a stretch of their life in which they drifted? Maybe they stopped going to Mass for years, or lived away from the sacraments, or had a habit they struggled to give up, or loved something more than God for too long. If they died in a state of grace, they are not condemned, but they may be in that stretch of purification where the shepherd's voice is heard only from afar, and they need someone to help them recognize again the voice they had learned to tune out in life. That someone, on June 29th, is Peter. But his apostolic intercession requires here as well a specific act on your part, a simple act the Church has practiced since the earliest centuries, with a particular effectiveness for souls that drifted. The act is this. Read slowly through the 21st chapter of John's Gospel. Just that chapter. It is brief, only 25 verses. Read it aloud, slowly, speaking your loved one's first name before you begin. When you reach the 3 questions Christ asked Peter, pause for a moment after each one and say inwardly to the shepherd, "Apply this love of Peter to the soul of my departed loved one. Apply this pastoral mandate to the lost lamb I entrust to you today." The reading takes less than 5 minutes. Its spiritual effectiveness, according to the patristic and mystical tradition, is proportional to the love with which it is done, and to the name pronounced before it begins. Saint Teresa of Avila recommended the practice of reading the Gospel aloud for the departed as one of the most effective forms of personal prayer available to any believer. The Word, she said, is living. When it is proclaimed for a specific soul, the Word penetrates to the other shore and produces precise spiritual effects, comparable to surgery on the soul. The full effect comes when it is spoken aloud, letting the vocal cords give it body, letting the air of your room fill with the sound of the gospel. The soul of your loved one, wherever it is, hears that sound through a channel which mystical theology calls the vocal participation of the church militant in the church triumphant. It is real. It is operative, and it works with a simplicity that astonishes those who try it for the first time. Do it in the days before the 29th. Once is sufficient, though more repetitions multiply the grace. The soul of your departed loved one, if it went astray at some point along the way, will hear the whole chapter with the spiritual hearing that souls retain after death. And it will recognize the voice of the Good Shepherd through yours, transmitted by the apostolic authority of Peter, who went out to the hillside to find it. After tending the lamb, Peter reaches into something he has the exclusive authority to distribute among souls reconciled with the shepherd, a treasury the Church has called for centuries by a precise name, a treasury infinite in its reserves, and a specific channel of application that Saint Teresa of Avila taught her nuns, one you are about to learn in the next step. There is a concept in Catholic theology that most of the faithful have heard only in passing, and yet it is one of the most practical there is for the departed. It is called the treasury of the Church. The definition is in the Catechism, in the sections on indulgences and the communion of saints. It is the spiritual patrimony accumulated from two inexhaustible sources. The first source is Christ Himself, whose redemptive merits are infinite because they are divine. The second source is the superabundant merits of the Virgin Mary and all the saints who, having fulfilled the will of God with heroic generosity, left a spiritual surplus as a legacy to the Church. This treasury is real. It is held according to the doctrine in a spiritual reserve accessible permanently to the Church through the sacraments, through indulgences, and through apostolic prayer. And the earthly administration of that reserve was entrusted by Christ to Peter, together with the keys of the kingdom. When Jesus said at Caesarea Philippi, "Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven," he was handing Peter the broadest judicial authority ever given to a human being. The authority to apply the treasury to souls that he, as visible head of the Church, judged worthy of receiving it. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote in the book of her foundations, in the chapters describing the poverty with which she established her convents and her absolute trust in divine providence through the Church, that the treasury of the saints was the only reserve she leaned on when material resources ran out. She said the nuns should know that each act of virtue they performed, however small it seemed, was accumulating in that common treasury, and that whenever someone applied that treasury for a departed loved one, the soul received relief proportional to the amount applied. For her it was exact spiritual arithmetic, passed on to her daughters with the clarity of someone who had done the accounting and seen the results. Here is the practical application. On June 29th, Peter opens the treasury with the key in his right hand, and he applies it, soul by soul, name by name, the precise doses each one needs to shorten its purification. For some souls, the dose is small, almost symbolic. For others, it is a complete spiritual transfusion of Christological and Marian merits. Peter knows the state of every soul. He knows how much each one needs, and he has been commissioned to apply it with apostolic generosity for everything asked of him on his feast day. Here too there is a condition: the application of the treasury of the Church to the soul of your departed loved one requires on your part a specific sacramental act. The practices I have been teaching you up to this point are preparatory. This is the culmination of all of them. Without this act, the others still count, but they are deprived of the maximum dose that only the sacrament unlocks. The sacramental act is attending Mass on June 29th, offered explicitly for the soul of your departed loved one. It is the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, a holy day of obligation in many countries, and a day of deep devotion in all of them. If you attend that Mass, receive communion in a state of grace, and offer your communion for the soul of your departed loved one, you gain in turn a plenary indulgence applicable to souls in purgatory under the ordinary conditions the Church requires. Sacramental confession within the 8 days before or after. Sacramental communion on the same day. Prayer for the intentions of the Roman Pontiff, and a genuine detachment from all sin, even venial. That plenary indulgence, applied to the soul of your departed loved one by Peter's hand, is the most concentrated dose of the treasury of the Church a soul can receive in a single day. It is the equivalent, spiritually speaking, of years of passive purification condensed into a single moment. It is the most effective thing you, as a lay faithful, can do for the soul of your departed during this apostolic solemnity. Saint Teresa of Avila told her nuns this plainly. The Mass of an apostle, offered for a departed loved one, was for her the highest form of suffrage a soul could receive from earth, above private prayers, above daily penances, above generous almsgiving. Because in the Mass, Christ himself is offered to the Father, and the blood of the Redeemer, applied by apostolic hands, redeems the soul of the departed with the infinite power of Calvary made present on the altar. If illness or genuine impossibility prevents you from attending Mass on June 29th, the Church makes a provision. Spiritual attendance through a televised transmission, united to a spiritual communion made with devotion, associates your intention with the suffrage. The fundamental suffrage, the application of the treasury to the soul of your loved one, is secured by your spiritual union with the sacrifice being celebrated at thousands of altars on that day. Do it this way. Mark June 29 on your calendar. Find the Mass that fits your schedule and go to confession in the days before. Arrive at church a few minutes early. And at the moment of the offertory, when the priest raises the bread and the chalice, say inwardly, I offer this Mass for the soul of my departed loved one. Saint Peter the Apostle, apply to them the full treasury of the Church through your apostolic intercession. But there is an 8th act, the last of the 8 that Peter does for your departed loved one, and it is the most striking of all, an act that has to do with his own death on a cross, with a decision of extreme humility he made in his final seconds, and with a personal offering that Peter renews each June 29th for the souls entrusted to him. That act changes, according to Saint Teresa of Jesus, the eternity of your departed loved one in a way no other intercessor can offer. The sky over Rome was gray that June morning in the year 67. Peter was 64 years old, perhaps 65. The soldiers of Nero had dragged him to the circus on the Vatican Hill after months of imprisonment in the Tullianum and the preliminary floggings that preceded every imperial execution. In front of him, planted in the earth near the empty stands, was a cross, the exact same shape as the cross on which the Master had died 34 years earlier in Jerusalem. Peter looked at the cross, and then he did something that changed the history of Christian spirituality. He asked to die head downward. The reason is recorded by the Fathers of the Church in nearly identical words across different ancient manuscripts. Eusebius of Caesarea, Origen, Saint Jerome, Saint Ambrose. They all repeat the same scene. Peter told the executioner, according to the various accounts, that he did not consider himself worthy to die in the same position as his Master. Christ had died with his face toward heaven, looking to the Father. Peter asked to die with his face toward the earth, looking at the dust from which he had been taken. That was the last sentence of his earthly life that has been preserved. After it came the inverted crucifixion, the sound smothered by the weight of the body, and after hours, according to the ancient accounts, the final surrender of the Spirit to the Father. What very few Catholics today know is this: the act of dying head downward was not simply a personal expression of Peter's humility. It was, according to later spiritual theology, an eternal pledge that the apostle contracted on behalf of the souls he would intercede for from heaven. Every minute hanging upside down, looking at the soil of Rome with his head filling with blood, was a merit accumulating in the treasury of the Church, reserved specifically for the souls he would choose to help after his death. And here is the 8th act, the last one, the one I opened at the start of this video and promised to close at the end. On June 29th, on the exact anniversary of his crucifixion, Peter renews the offering of that act of extreme humility for the souls entrusted to him during the year. And this is a real spiritual act according to the doctrine of the communion of saints taught by the Church in the Catechism. Peter offers again the merit accumulated in his inverted martyrdom, soul by soul, name by name, exactly for those who, from here below, entrusted themselves to his patronage with perseverance in the preceding days. This act changes the eternity of the soul of your departed loved one in a way no other intercessor can offer. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote in the book of her Foundations, in the chapters where she speaks of humility as the indispensable condition for entering glory, that the soul which receives in purgatory the merits of an apostolic martyrdom undergoes a specific transformation that no other suffrage produces. The humility of the martyr penetrates the soul of the departed like water entering parched earth. Its attachments to earthly things, its residues of pride, its final resistance to the will of God, dissolve like snow under the sun. The soul is left in perfect readiness for the spiritual marriage with Christ that she described in the interior castle, and it enters. In that very moment, if the soul was already purified of everything else. In the weeks that follow, if there are minor residues left to clear. Think now, after everything you have learned, about what happens to the soul of your departed loved one on June 29th, if you have done the acts that Saint Teresa of Jesus herself taught. You have fulfilled the 4 conditions that open the 8 doors. The Apostles' Creed professed in their name in the days before. The brief novena of 1 decade, a day for 9 days. The reading aloud of John's 21st chapter. Attendance at Mass on the 29th with communion received in grace, and the explicit offering of the plenary indulgence for the soul of your departed loved one. 4 simple acts, accessible to any devoted Catholic, carried out with perseverance in the days before the solemnity. And then, when Peter renews the offering of his inverted martyrdom for the souls entrusted to him, the soul of your departed loved one receives the final push it needed to enter into glory. Close your eyes for a moment as you hear this. Bring to mind the face of your loved one as you remember them on their best days. The smile, the eyes, the way they looked at you. And now see that face entering a light unlike any light on earth, warm and still, a light that recognizes, that receives, that embraces with the tenderness of the Father who was waiting. That is the glory of Christ, receiving your departed loved one. That is the final result of the 8 acts of St. Peter the Apostle applied to their soul during the solemnity of June 29th. That is what your heart was asking for, without words every time you prayed for them, through these years of quiet longing. Your departed loved one, if you do what the Church asks and what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught her nuns, will not need to wait another year, or wait for another solemnity, or watch decades of silent, passive purification go by. This coming June 29th will be, for them, the day when 8 doors open at once through the apostolic intercession of Peter, and when Christ, looking at the apostle with the same tenderness with which he looked at him in the high priest's courtyard, receives the soul of your loved one with the embrace you have been quietly asking for all these years. That is what happens. That is what the Church gives you when you trust the apostles with the ones you love. That is what the foundress of the Discalced Carmelites left in writing so that no devoted Catholic would ever forget it. You have made it to the end. And before anything else, I want you to know that the time you spent listening to this was not time wasted. It was time heaven is already counting as active suffrage for the soul of your departed loved one. Every minute you spent here, while the voice continued and your heart stayed attentive, was prayer. It was intercession. It was one more decade in the spiritual novena you have, without quite realizing it, been praying for your loved one's soul. What you have received in this hour together is a complete map, ordered and verified in the Church's own sources and in the writings of St. Teresa of Jesus. You now know precisely what St. Peter the Apostle does for the soul of your departed loved one when June 29th comes. You know which 8 doors he opens, one by one, with the apostolic authority Christ gave him at Caesarea Philippi. And you know, above all, which 4 specific conditions you, from here below, can fulfill so that those doors open without obstacle. The Apostles' Creed professed in their name, the brief novena of 1 decade, a day for 9 days, the reading aloud of John's 21st chapter, attendance at Mass on the 29th with communion in grace offered explicitly for their soul. You may have spent years praying for your departed loved one without the certainty that your prayers were reaching the other shore. That uncertainty is gone. You hold in your hands an order of apostolic operation that most devoted Catholics have never heard in full, and you leave here with the peace of someone who has finally found the right key for the right door. Before I say goodbye, I want to ask you 3 small and very concrete things that will keep alive in your daily life what has just happened in this hour of shared prayer. The first is this. Open the comments on this video and write, with your own hands, one short phrase. St. Peter the Apostle, intercede for my departed loved one before June 29th. Just that, without writing the name of your loved one, without long explanations, without added prayers. That written phrase is a formal entrustment of your intention to apostolic patronage, and it is also a joining of your petition with those of hundreds of Catholic brothers and sisters doing the same thing at this exact moment. When you leave that phrase written, the Church militant becomes, for a few seconds, a single choir of voices asking the first of the apostles to open 8 doors. Do it now if you have not done it yet. It takes 30 seconds. And it leaves an echo that lasts until the 29th. The second is this. Your heart, right now, is more open than it has been at any other moment today. That openness deserves to be carried forward beyond this message. There is much more that St. Teresa of Jesus left in writing about the apostles, about the departed, about souls that wait, about the specific graces the Church delivers to those who know how to ask for them. Much more than fits in a single hour of shared prayer. And there is a message already prepared and waiting for you that picks up exactly where this one ends. A message that has to do with another holy intercessor, with another day on the liturgical calendar that is drawing near, and with a specific grace your departed loved one needs in addition to the one St. Peter will apply on June 29th. Stay with me a little longer. What comes next is the natural continuation of what you have learned today, and the foundress of the Discalced Carmelites still has much to tell you about your departed loved ones. Keep alive the spiritual current this hour has lit in you. Continue to the next step while the voice is still resonating and the prayer is still active. Your departed loved one will be grateful for it, wherever they are. And the third, the most important of the 3. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe right now. Press the red button. Do it before the video ends. Set aside any thought of statistics or numbers. Do it for the message itself, for the souls waiting in silence for the continuity of this teaching in your everyday life. Every week, I publish a new message built with the same doctrinal seriousness and the same spiritual depth as the one you have just heard. Messages drawn directly from the documentary sources of Saint Teresa of Jesus, from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and from verified patristic tradition. Messages your soul needs and that your departed loved one is grateful for, from the other shore, each time you listen to them with devotion. Subscribing means these messages will reach you as soon as they are published, without your having to search for them one by one. It means you will also receive the special novenas for the great solemnities, the teachings about souls in purgatory that Saint Teresa of Jesus left in writing, the spiritual preparations for the liturgical days your calendar is marking ahead. And it means, above all, that your departed loved one will have an active intercessor in every new video, because each one carries in its underlying intention the souls entrusted by the subscribers of this channel. Subscribe now. Turn on the notification bell. Do it before you close the video. Your departed loved one is asking you to, from wherever they are. And now, before you close this message, I want to stay with you just a few seconds more, like a friend who walks you to the door after a long conversation. You have been with me for more than an hour. You have heard ancient truths spoken in a new voice. You have learned to trust an apostle who has spent 20 centuries waiting for more Catholics to call on him by name. And you have discovered, alongside Saint Teresa of Jesus, that your departed loved one is much closer than they seemed, and that June 29th is within reach of your hand. You hold right now, in your hands, everything you need to give your departed loved one the greatest gift a living person can give to the one they have lost. May the peace of Christ, which surpasses all understanding, come down on you this evening and remain in your home. May the intercession of Saint Peter the Apostle and of Saint Teresa of Jesus accompany you through every decade of the Novena you are going to begin tomorrow. May the soul of your departed loved one, before the 29th, feel the first movement of the air that announces 8 doors opening one by one. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.